In this panel session, we're going to discuss with these panel members how nature and circular economy have been integrated in the CSD reports, what we can learn from how the market has done this, and particularly also how it has transformed decision-making. And lastly, we'll also, I think, quickly have a look at the recent developments at the European level with the omnibus proposal. Well, I think further on that later. But maybe to start with you, Tulay. You are an expert at Deloitte, having also, I think it's on. Yes. Yeah. You're an expert at Deloitte, having a good overview of the market, of course. And I think in the past year, it's been sort of, CSD has probably been the alpha and the omega sort of that we've been working on. Could you perhaps walk us a bit through what you see in the market, particularly on this nature and circular economy reporting as part of the CSRD?
Sure, thank you, Werner. Everyone can hear me clearly, hopefully. Okay. Expert. I'm a chartered auditor focusing on ESG assurance information that companies provide in their sustainability reporting. This year has been quite challenging because the CSRD in the Netherlands was not yet transpositioned into the Dutch law. But companies listed reported still on CSRD in accordance with ASRS in their reporting. And that provided us with some insights, which I gathered for this session. So let me take you with that. It's just a high view that can summarize the developments, what we see about published reports of companies. First of all, it's a lot of pages in addition, so which is a good perspective, I guess. But so I think companies had a lot to disclosure when it comes to sustainability information. But yeah, we can argue whether all those pages are necessary, but that's something for the discussion later. On average, the amount of pages have increased with between 80 and 120, which is quite a lot.
Quite in addition to the annual report, yeah.
Yeah. Now, going further, also in the time, we have, of course, different themes, the ESG, and on average, 7 of those ESRS topics are deemed material for those companies, and maybe obvious, E1, S1, and G1 are reported by almost all companies. So then when we deep dive a little bit more, then here you see an overview of the different standards and the topics, where we see again E1, S1 and G1 is like almost 100%. But we are here also to discuss the disclosures on E4 and E5. So for that, it is just a quick overview. So we are still also busy with performing a benchmark, of course. But on the left, you see the different industries summarized a bit. In the official publication, it will be more detailed. And then the green bulk is the E4 on biodiversity reportings. And E5 is on the circular economy and these kind of topics. So perhaps we can use this one to discuss further in our panel discussion.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. Thanks for also this factual basis for the discussion.
Helps a little bit.
Maybe very quickly, was there something that particularly stood out for you if you looked at companies reporting on E4, which we mean then sort of biodiversity, and E5 is then resource use?
So my role as a chartered auditor is, of course, to challenge those companies, disclosure more depthly on certain metrics, or also, if you look at the data points in ASRS, like 70% is about qualitative information. So really challenge them to provide the necessary information for stakeholders and investors, banks, so that they can use this information to make useful decisions. So what stood out for me, the first sets were also quite on the surface when developing or when disclosing on these kind of topics. And many companies have difficulties on reporting on biodiversity information in general. What we also see here is that biodiversity is a bit behind compared to all the other information as well. While, yeah, we could argue whether that should not be like a main topic for a lot of companies, taking knowledge of the IPCC developments.
Dan, I see you nodding. You have biodiversity also as a material topic, which means that you then report on it, as well as resource use.
Yeah,
Do you recognize this challenge of...
Yeah, I think today's totally right that we see an underreporting on biodiversity and ecosystems. Mainly if you look at like how climate change works together with biodiversity and ecosystems, you should assume that both are at the same level because they are so intertwined in actually the science. And so it's strange to me, at least as a biodiversity advisor, that I don't see a lot of companies reporting on biodiversity, which the topic didn't become material. Well, in my opinion, it should have.
And how did Heijmans try to report on biodiversity then?
Yeah, it became material at first through only climate change. I wasn't part of Heijmans back then, so but it became material, and then they thought, okay, let's dive into it further, and we basically saw that actually all the impact drivers on biodiversity were relevant to us. So land use change, direct exploitation, invasive species, and of course also climate change. And that basically that realization only became clear during the reporting process, and also the accountant first, they said, okay, that's fine, only through climate change, but then they also realized, wait, that doesn't make sense. We need to change that.
And did you, as Tulay also said, it was it's a lot qualitative, particularly. Did you also try to quantify it? Do you have like hard quantified targets on this one?
Yeah, well, we try to quantify it through locations and where we are close to biodiversity sensitive areas. And basically, yeah, we're a construction company, so we have projects all around the Netherlands, and there were like 3,000 projects that we have to go through, and like I think we came to 900 locations, and that became material. And then we had to look at the area they actually occupied. So that's what we try to describe in our report. But in the future, we want to also look at land use change that we actually do. Because of our projects, and of course, on the diversity of that nature that we want to include in our projects.
Solange, zooming in on ABN AMRO as a financial institution, you make biodiversity and resource use also material. Why are they so material for ABN particularly?
Yeah, and maybe we can switch the slide, because I'm representing a sector that is least reporting on it, and making it least material here. But why is it material for ABN AMRO? I would like to take a step back, because as all of us do, you start with the double materiality analysis. And I really want to say that I find it a very useful instrument, because that really shows you where your material impacts are. And if you have a material impact, then you have to do something with it. And in our case, for a bank, that means we basically look through two lenses. On the one hand, we look at the drivers of biodiversity loss in there, and then we have, for instance, climate change already covered under E1. But we also look through the portfolio that we finance, which is basically distributed over multiple sectors in there. So you start looking with this sector lens and the combination of the drivers of biodiversity loss. And if you then finance the agricultural sector, I find it hard to understand that you would not have a material impact in there, even though it is derived through your clients, of course. So we did it with that lens, and in that respect, we come out with two elements. That on the one hand, through the sector lens, we have the agricultural portfolio, which is material for us. And the other reality is, and you mentioned land use already, we have a very big mortgage portfolio in there. So maybe it's not the most material impact in terms of land use, I don't know in there, but it's material in terms of the impact that we have in there and the influence that we can have as well. So those are for us the two parts of our overall balance sheet and portfolio that have really driven the biodiversity materiality. Yeah. But you also see that the financial sector is not so much reporting on E5. There we also made it a material topic, not necessarily coming out of the double materiality analysis, but particularly because of our strategy. For years we're already trying to build and contribute to the circular economy. So also then I would find it rather inconsistent if we now have a framework under which we report what we strategically do on our impacts, that all of a sudden it disappears there. So that's the background for us, why we have made E4 and E5, why they are material for us.
Maybe it's good that some other financial institutions also start looking with this perspective to their materially on E4 and E5.
Well,
so
maybe
that's
the benefit of
the number.
CSRD as well.
For sure.
The peer pressure that is now starting to emerge.
Maybe zooming in particularly on E5, what did you report on it? I think more perhaps on the quantitative side. So what did it bring along in terms of perhaps targets, metrics?
Well, where on E4, it is particularly qualitative in the E5 for us is quantitative, because for quite a number of years we already have a target on the volume of circular deals that we finance there. And that is something that we could just continue to build up and extend on. So that's the quantitative quantitative part that we have on circularity. And as said, the whole inclusion of it came because of our strategy and strategic approach. And we could bring this into the framework of CSRD and continue on right now.
Maybe very quickly, we said it very quickly, E4, this is a bit of the jargon for people that are not familiar with the CSRD, is the biodiversity element. E5 is resource use. Well, so then we sort of have a context of what we mean. Daan, now of course, CSRD is particularly a reporting standard. Now, reporting alone will not change the world. It's in the end sort of that it's integrated into the business. How did the CSRD create change perhaps in your policies and in your targets on resource use?
Resource use, we haven't reported that much, but we are mostly looking at it through a lens of an opportunity to reduce cost. Because we as a construction company use a lot of materials, but at the end of the day, if we use less materials and we can reuse the material actually that we find at the construction place, then we can actually make that a business model as well, as Jan talked about it. It helps us to reduce costs in projects. Yeah.
And does that also help in the communication to the organizations that you do tenders for and organizations that you?
Yeah, I think resource use, of course, obviously, but I think for nature also as well, it becomes. Well, we try to actually also use the CSRD as a sort of starting point for nature strategy and nature reporting as well, and we actually translated that nature CSRD jargon to actually a common, easy, understandable language to our business and to our construction workers. If I go to a construction worker and I say, improve biodiversity, ecosystems and ecosystem services, he gets a heart attack. He thinks, well, what the hell are you talking about, right? So then we actually look at like the impact drivers of biodiversity, and we, for example, land use change, we talked about it. We call that, for example, now space of nature. Space of nature, make square meters of nature. And then the persons at the projects actually understand what they have to do. So that's also an opportunity, actually, that we use the CSRD for.
So brought along this impact language also more deeply into the organization.
Exactly, and create a structure that actually also does the reporting for you. So, yeah.
So launch, did it bring along extra targets or ambitions or maybe also changes in the governance for ABN AMRO?
Yeah, it certainly will, because maybe again a bit of a step back. We did a lot of this with our finance colleagues, and that is very much a disclosure perspective. But behind CSRD is very much understand your impacts and then start dealing with it. Have a strategy, have a metric, have a target for it. And so, for instance, on biodiversity, it also came kind of parallel with our nature statement that we issued last year, where we really committed ourselves to the global biodiversity framework in there. And that requires us to ultimately come with targets as well in there. So yes, this whole journey does mean that we will come with... we have targets on the climate side. We have an extensive climate plan where across all the sectors that we finance, across the portfolio that we have set clear decarbonization targets with intermediate targets for 2030 and 2050. But with the phase-in approach of CSRD, we will also have them on the nature side.
Nice.
Yeah.
Jan, you in your keynote, you talked about how you can bring investors along in long-term value creation.
Yep.
How is the CSRD, particularly on the E4 and E5, going to help in the discussions with the shareholders? And perhaps you see already some changes.
Well, I mean, the firms that are able to communicate, right, and they must communicate what they have done, to make improvements over time, like setting targets. And the good thing about CSRD is that we often think, if we report, that is looking back, because that is what we've done. But the good thing about that you have to report is that the people in the firms are going to think ahead. So how is this going to impact my reporting tomorrow? So it's not the case that it's not a problem that it is looking back, because it makes the people who make the decisions in the firms looking forward, and that's what you see now happening in firms, and that is the big win from the introduction of CSRD. So that has a huge impact on how people think in the firms, and also they have to convince the investor, right? So it's yes. So it is very positive in that sense. Yeah.
Ulay, are you seeing this too?
Yeah. So especially when companies start gathering information, performing double materiality analysis, and understanding how it is connected with the strategy, for example.
Yep.
In some cases, I think Heijmans even makes profit with biodiversity. Maybe you can also mention something on that. But what helps me with the discussion with my clients is also, obviously, if CSRD is part of Dutch law, it would be more helpful. But the banking confidence, for example, I see more and more that they also include topics, or externally, if you look at, we also had a discussion, the government, when they ask for certain, aanbesteding, I don't know how you call it in English, but you see more and more that you can even have profits or make an advantage compared to competitors, which will be very interesting in the boardroom to have these kind of discussions. So definitely.
Dan, do you have an example of that?
Yeah, so I think, so we had a tender actually from a client of ours that basically said like, okay, you have to do this construction project, but there are no sustainability demands. And then we as a sector said, well, we don't want that. You have to change and add sustainability demands, because actually it doesn't, go together with our sustainability strategy. And that's actually what we are also currently fighting with the current political landscape in the Netherlands, of course. But also to go back on what Tule just said, like also making a profit, for example, on biodiversity. When we actually go to a project and we improve the biodiversity and nature over there, for example, municipality will say, wait a second, what does that actually help us? Does that help us? And what we're trying to do right now is actually make also monetary valuation of that nature that we include in the project. And that basically means that if they, for example, pay 10,000 euros more for a project, in the end, the nature will bring back that value to the customer. And then actually it becomes a business model. And also what Jan talked about, social value, you actually make a business model out of nature. Of course, you have to do that in the right way, right? It doesn't have to be greenwashing or anything else. It needs to be measured correctly, but then there are a lot of opportunities there for our clients to get more value out of the projects that they get from us. Yeah.
So actually become happy with a larger sustainability criteria and tenders, because then you get also better figures in your own books.
Exactly, yeah. So water retention, happiness, value of real estate, all goes up when you include nature.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, Solange, is this also a logic that ABN follows, that you think also set those criteria perhaps for potential new clients?
I'm thinking about it while you're speaking, because there are multiple perspectives on this. On the opportunity side, yes, we certainly recognize this. And Jan, you said it as well. Ultimately, impact is the business model that you're having in there. So if I then translate that to the bank, I mentioned mortgages already, but with mortgages comes also the renovation potential of the building that you're buying, of the house that you're buying. Yes, we finance that. That's an opportunity there. But this whole transition requires a lot of financing, whether it's on the agricultural sector, whether it's on the commercial real estate. So yes, we certainly finance this. But that in itself is not only driving requiring a lot of sustainability requirements from our customers. If I take the banking perspective, ultimately we are also managing risk as a bank. We attract savings from our clients, but we lend it to other clients. That means we also need to get it back to pay the savings back. And if you look to where we finance, and in all these sectors, we basically really also have to understand the physical risks that are in that portfolio, as well as the transition risks that are in that portfolio. Because if we do not understand, and this translates into credit risk as well, and if we do not properly grasp that and understand that, we're actually bad bankers. We're managing risk in a very inappropriate way. And in terms of understanding that requires that we really know where the land is. Is it close to a threatened natural environment? Where the transition risk is, does a company have licensing risks due to all kind of sustainability regulation that is there? So that is also very much a driver of a lot of requirements and transition plans that we ask from our clients there. And that is being challenged with the latest developments in CSRD, where if a much bigger group of clients or companies does not have to report, that poses a real challenge to us to the financial sector.
Do more linear companies, so to say, then get already sort of worse risk assessments in that regard, or is it still?
Yeah, risk is never one-dimensional in that respect. So it's a combination of many things. Yes, but we are progressing and developing and learning along the way in differentiation between how well companies are prepared in and for the transition, and bring that into pricing, bring that into risk assessments. So yes, that is certainly taking place.
It's even true that if you look at firms that are really prepared for how the climate develops, they actually decrease de facto their risk and thus their cost of capital. So that really works, and that has nothing to do with being overly optimistic or anything, right? It's just a fact, right? So that's already a finding. So firms should keep thinking about that, right? How they can actually create, because what you do, you create a hedge against how the developments are, and as a consequence, you are looking at a lower cost of capital.
Oh, so it increasingly has benefits. I think that's great to hear. At the same time, I think if we look at the current economic reality, we have quite some, particularly, for example, Circulaire champions in the Netherlands. They've sort of went bankrupt, for example, in the plastics industry.
Yep.
There's an increasing focus also on short-term financial gains, sort of making sure that the European competitiveness in relation to China and the US sort of remains there. So at the same time, how would Circulaire sort of organizations should deal with that sort of changing landscape? Maybe first to you, Jan.
So one thing, let's say that we in Europe become the specialists in the world in transition, like the Netherlands is in waterworks, right?
Yeah.
In Mumbai, they cannot breathe anymore because of the smog. Shanghai goes in that direction as well. They are really waiting for solutions, right? So it's even good for Europe if we do that, right? So I'm in that sense, I'm very optimistic as to what are the possibilities, and we should. That's why I say, never mind the politics. That's why I started with that, because we just have to go ahead, and I'm sure that we are going to be able to also benefit from that in all respects. So both in the environment, but also financially.
Okay, so Tulay, I'm also curious how you reflect on this, because I mean, like, you could also say, like, if the market could solve it, then we would not be having any issues at the moment. But at the same time, there's some challenge in bringing the circular economy about. So how do we deal with the fact that sometimes, let's say, financial returns conflict with a higher circular business model?
Yes. From my perspective as a chartered auditor, it's quite difficult. But what I see that organizations, there are a lot of opportunities, but it's all based on dilemmas that they have to choose between several options, of course. So the CSRD would be very helpful within Europe to also help these companies drive into these kind of opportunities and make a difference there. But yeah, nowadays we are in a different kind of political environment, I would say, without going too deep into that. But yeah, that helps us as well on long-term developments within Europe on reporting, on diving into these kind of opportunities, getting bankrupt, for example. What I think is a good opportunity within Europe is, for example, mainly for construction companies, the CBAM, which helps also make investments within Europe on different solutions like greener steel or so, which helps companies to also go for these kind of options rather than buying it from other companies.
The CBAM is the carbon border adjustment mechanism.
Yes, sorry.
The border sort of tax on carbon. Staying with you, because you talked about these recent developments, one of the major recent developments is the omnibus proposal. I should say it's a proposal, it's not sort of enforced yet, which actually represents a strong, let's say, dilution of the initial scope as well as the depth of CSRD and CS, Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. How will this impact on transparency? What's your current view on this?
Yeah, so on the 26th of February, we had this huge proposal from the European Commission helping to minimize the administrative burden for companies. I would say, like, which kind of administrative burdens? Maybe we didn't see everything yet, but simply it reduces also the amount of companies that need to report on the CSRD, right? From
80%, right?
Yeah. It was like applicable for companies with more than 250% employees, and now it is taken up until 1,000, and that's like quite a lot of junk. There are some difficulties there. It is just a proposal, so we have to see how it will develop. But what I think is also difficult is that the large listed companies now have a criteria of 500 employees, for example. There's even coming a split in that category. And lighter ASRS standards, value chain is being kept. So that's also very interesting to launch to see. Like first, you have fewer reports of companies reporting on ASRS, but also the value chain is like caps on the VSMA standards. What I think, to keep it positive, because there is a lot of variance on companies. Some say like, oh yes, the CSRD is now not longer permitted for me, so I just focus on my business as usual. And other companies see it really as an opportunity to continue and are looking for opportunities like the VSMA standards or...
That's the voluntary
sustainability.
enterprise.
Or on GRI, because we shouldn't forget that companies report for a long time now on GRI with voluntary assurance already. So I agree with Jan. Sustainability is here to stay, but the form and the details will be...
Solange, as a financial institution, also focusing on long-term value creation, what does this omnibus proposal mean for the long-term value creation of ABN AMRO in the long run?
And maybe I first want to say thank you for translating our...
I'll try my best, yes.
language over here, Werner. What does it mean for us? I like to take one other point that you're making, because I find the development on CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, quite interesting, because they take a lot of companies out of that as well, but they still manage to capture 95 to 99% of the emissions. So that's quite an interesting development in there, and materiality as such matters. We should really make sure that we really focus on those companies, on those sectors, on those things where we really make big steps in there. And that's something I would like to see kind of the thinking translated to CSRD. But overall and in itself, that's where we started. the omnibus development, the fact that a lot less companies need to report under CSRD, that it comes to a voluntary standard, will pose a challenge for us. I mentioned already that we need to understand the risks. In order to understand the risk, you have to go to company level, you have to be really granular. And if they don't report on it, then we can only work with estimates, proxies, etc. Next to that, we are the whole financial industry in Europe is also supervised by the European Central Bank, by the European Banking Authority there, and they require from us that we manage risk in an appropriate manner. And we have all these data in order to fill our risk models, etc. So it will pose a real challenge for the financial industry, the fact that potentially all these companies will not report sufficient information on their risks. As for us, it's all derived, given that we finance the real economy there. So yes, it for us, this will pose a real challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine. Maybe given, let's say, those developments, the Daan closing, we've now had the first wave of CSRD reports within Heijmans. What are the next steps on these impacts that you've reported on, particularly on circularity and biodiversity? What is ahead for you?
Well, so to also add on that, I think whether you like it or not, climate change and biodiversity crisis and pollution crisis are not going away. So CSRD, it can go away. We obviously stay still in the companies that have to report according to the CSRD, even if Omnibus becomes reality. But the problems won't go away. So we see it actually as a core business as well to become sustainable, because then we become a more resilient company. And then for ABN AMRO, it becomes more attractive to also help us and finance us. But for circularity and biodiversity, we actually, especially for biodiversity, we still have to look at what exactly is our impact on our direct operations, but also in our value chain. Based on my intuition, the impact on biodiversity is far more in our value chain, where we take stones, where we take all these raw materials, we change landscapes into dirtscapes, as I like to call them. And then, so actually looking at those places and where the biggest impact is, and then looking at those places and changing something there, that is actually where I am looking at. But that's very, very far away maybe, but as Jan said, high ambitions are good. So, yeah.
Very nice. So, Lange, what can we expect from ABN AMRO in the future on biodiversity and circular after this first wave of CSRD reports?
We will progress. We will phase in. We will take the steps that we planned to take, because we face all the same reality. You started with it as well. Climate change, biodiversity loss doesn't stop because it's not in favor at this point in time, and it's as I've mentioned a couple of times, it poses real risks and opportunities as well. So we will progress.
It's inevitable.
Yeah.
Boulay, what will you see in the market next year when we come here together again?
Yeah, I think there will be a higher demand of society on trustworthy information on ESG topics. So that will continue. And from that regard, we will just provide limited assurance nowadays and continue with that. And also ask companies please go ahead and go on the route and continue with reporting on these themes, because it is very important.
Jan, do you have an enlightening, sort of positive, optimistic closing statement for us?
Let me start with something negative.
Oh!
So when you look at diversity, right, the way that firms report on that number, how well they do that, right? Actually, the finding is that they talk a lot about it, but they don't really achieve much in this space. I mean, this is US research. So actually they lie about their diversity policies and the successes that they achieve with that. And that just says to me that even if it is voluntary, right, you need to make sure that this number is right, because at some point you will fall through, right? And that is where we are learning a lot now. And in my view, right, the reporting in this space, so in the ESG space, will improve a lot in that space, And that means that we can better trust these numbers, and that is essential to make progress. And we are really looking at big steps that are made in this space.
I hear more assurance on the figures.
You need more assurance, yeah.
Good one.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Daan, Solange, Tulay, and Jan for this great panel. Yeah, give them a warm applause.